time when he collaborated with a guy named Matt Wickline, who wrote that character, which always had a pretty formulaic, same beat, 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 which you'll see here. And the second one is he and Matt Wickline stopped working together, and he started working with a guy named Adam Resnick, who's a very brilliant comedy writer, and he did an impression of Marlon Brando. And I was most impressions of Marlon Brando up until then had been, Brando on the Streetcar, Brando in The Godfather, and this is kind of late Brando as a kind of bloated, full of himself fool. And there's one, I'm hoping it translates, but he has one bit which is sort of like just the pure silliness of Chris Elliott, where he does what is called the banana dance. And so I'm thrilled to put the banana dance on a big screen here tonight. So Cabin Boy, I actually haven't seen in 2.5 decades, and is a cult film. I mean, I don't think it's being, I think it's safe to say that there isn't being shown anywhere else in the world right now. This is, and I'll just say, I have one friend, I don't even know if he was here, but I was walking around near my house, and an old friend of mine stopped me, and he said, "Wow, that's so great that you're showing Cabin Boy. I love Cabin Boy. It's such a great movie." And I was like, "I'm really happy to hear you say that." And then his tone got kind of quiet and conspiratorial. He said, "But isn't it the worst movie ever made?" And the fact that you can have both those two, like he saw it and loved it, and also wondered that, I think speaks to how unique this movie is. And also, this movie was made by Adam Resnick, who worked with him on the Banana Dance. And I think Chris Elliott had an incredibly unique, singular sensibility that was shared a lot with Letterman, but was also distinct from Letterman. It was another kind of ironic comedy. And I think that Cabin Boy, I remember, if you plug into it, that it's an incredible movie. So this will be a fun experiment. Afterwards, I'm going to answer a question or two in a Q&A, and then we're going to have a party for the book. And just to let you know, I have an open bar for an hour with food. Afterwards, you got to pay, so hurry up, get the free drinks quickly. But then I hope you stay along and celebrate. Thank you all for coming so much.
Welcome out of back, Jason Zinoman. Well,
I thoroughly enjoyed that crazy movie.
I think that, I mean, speaking on behalf of Metrograph, we've been wanting to do something with this film for a very long time. It's a film dear to our hearts, so what an occasion to do so.
Yeah.
Thank you.
By the way, did you notice the banana dance music was the music for the when he was dancing?
Oh, yeah.
So that was actually, that clip was a good setup for that movie.
Yeah. I think maybe the first question that I'd like to ask you, since this is part of a sort of small series we're doing on films with other cameos or broader appearances by David Letterman, I'm just wondering if you had any comments to say about his appearances in film before we talk about his for the body work.
Nobody should really program a David Letterman Film Festival. It's a really bad idea. And I'm sort of proud that I conned you guys into doing it. He is not that's not where his pride was. That he didn't, he is a radio and television performer. And he did not like to act, and that was true on his television show too. He played himself, a version of himself, and he played kind of an authority figure, kind of a paternal authority figure occasionally. But this is a really unusual movie in that he actually is playing a character, an old salt. And you see, I mean, he doesn't even, in the credits, his name isn't in there. His name is Earl Hofert, or how you pronounce it, who I believe was his uncle on his mother's side. And I think is also the name of the character in Beavis and Butthead that he does the voice for, who turns out to be, spoiler, Butthead's father. So he's, I mean, I think he did a couple movies where he played himself, like Andy Kaufman's movie and Howard Stern's movie. And then he had this interesting window where in the mid-90s, when he took over at CBS, and I think, you know, was also his height of his fame when he did a few cameos here. Interestingly, he, in the late 80s, he signed a deal with Disney for a lot of money to make movies. And I read about this in the book, that he called up George Meyer, who's one of the first writers for Letterman, a brilliant, one of the greatest comedy writers of the modern era, who had a huge impact on The Simpsons day, and had a huge impact on early Letterman. And he wrote a script, which is also kind of a storied, legendary script, which is, he described to me as sort of, Letterman plays a sort of an Austin Powers-like James Bond figure, but there's some kind of like meta quality to it too, that he's and he I mean, I'd love to see the script, but but he sent it to Letterman, and you know, Letterman never went through with it. He eventually gave him money back. So there was a moment where it seemed like, you know, we have this guy's a big star, what do you do with him? Let's make movies. And then, you know, I think he was never comfortable with that. But he did this, you know, he did this scene. And, you know, famously, you know, the line, you know, the monkey line, he made like every big star in Hollywood say it in the Oscars. So yeah, that's the. I mean, I think from the perspective of the show, you often have, when I'm reporting this book, and I talked to a lot of writers from the show, they said it was a challenge to find comedy sketches where we can work around this fact that Letterman does not want to act. You compare that to, and I think, you know, it's to his credit. I think he knew what he acted in a Mork and Mindy, which you can see on YouTube, which is really bad. And I actually recently, I was at a conference last week, in which a guy came up to me and said that he was a writer for Mork and Mindy at that time. And he said, you know, that was the worst Mork and Mindy written script. You know, like, I mean, Letterman was bad, don't get me wrong, but we gave him a terrible script to work with. He played like some kind of guru kind of character, but anyways, he knew that wasn't his forte, and he didn't want to do that. But if you compare that now with like people like Fallon, who you know, finds any excuse he can to act, or Colbert.
I haven't read any interviews with you regarding this book, but I thought maybe you could talk about your sort of personal connection with David Letterman, because he was such a specter of late night television that I feel like if you look at the landscape now, there really isn't such, there's not a personality that matches that, I don't think. I mean, there are you know, some good people, but Letterman was you know, a special kind of, you know, old school late night host that I feel like you know, most of us who are familiar with him remember very fondly. So maybe on a personal level, if you could talk about how you first maybe became a fan, and maybe talk about why you wanted to then write the book.
I mean, I was a Letterman nut who used to stay up, you know, late and watch his shows, and you know, I think I knew I loved Letterman before I thought like a critic or a reporter, and to some extent, writing the book was an attempt to kind of figure out where that came from. But I mean, I think one of the interesting things about Letterman is that he wasn't just influential to comedians. He wasn't just he didn't just, you know, kind of pioneer talk shows, but there was a whole generation of people who imitated him, and the way he talked, the strange way he, you know, his physicality, and I was one of those people. So like, if some people here who know me for a long time, like my friend Vanessa up here from high school, they could say that in high school, the intonations in my, like how I use sarcasm is completely ripped off from Letterman, or how, you know, just the endless amount of things. Recently, when I was in high school, I ran an underground newspaper, which is like a comedic underground newspaper, and I look back at it, and there's like a top 10 list which has like the exact, like number 1 is not the funny one, just like on Letterman, you know, the number 3 is the really funny one, and so yeah, he was a huge impact on me, and you know, that's sort of the source of why I was interested. I mean, the book I wrote before this was about horror films, which is the other thing that I was really fanatical about. So in a weird way, these books are sort of using the tools that I've learned as a critic and reporter to figure out what these childhood loves.
Before I turn it over to you guys, I'm just curious if you'd ever gone to a taping of his show, I had the privilege of going to one of his last tapings, like the last year. And I was just so completely impressed by the slickness of the production, but also just how he really cared about the audience. He would ask people questions. He just felt, kind of engaged in a way that you could sense on, on television. But I don't know. I'm wondering if you.
Was this in the last couple of months?
This was last year.
Last year, yeah.
So it was. I don't remember the guess. It was unfortunate night when there were, nobody to mention that, is worth remembering. But that said, I just didn't know if you had, seen the spectacle of the actual taping.
Right. I have seen one episode, which I read about in the book, which was the summer before I went to college. My college started later than others, and me and a friend of mine, who I think is also here, Jeff Graham somewhere, went to, it was the second week of the new show, of the CBS show, so it was the biggest event in pop culture. And we went to New York to see him, and it was actually, it was electric, because the late night war was every day in the news, and the battle between Leno and Letterman really meant something. I was, if you were a Leno fan, that said something about you. If you were a Letterman fan, that said something about you. To a 17-year-old who, a snotty 17-year-old, I was really invested in the difference between these two men. And so, anyways, my story here is that I went to the show, and there was an usher there, and I went up to the usher and I said, "Could I get an autograph?" And he said, "If you can get a can of Spam before the doors open, I'll get you an autograph." And Letterman did a lot of jokes about canned ham and all this stuff. And so we had a choice here, because the doors were going to open soon, and it's not, how easy is it to find a can of Spam in Times Square? I don't know. But so we ran out and went from bodega to bodega. No one had Spam, no one had Spam, no one had Spam. And we finally found some nut job who was selling a can of Spam, and we got the can of Spam. We ran back to the show, and the doors were open and people were coming in, and we just made it, and I handed it off to the usher. We saw the show, and it was Siskel and Ebert, Raj, I think it was Robert Plant, and it was it was completely different than seeing it on TV. And there were some things about it which actually I thought were, like, there was at that point they really wanted to get a feel of bigness and audience laughter. So you had like a warm-up guy telling everyone to laugh. And part of what the people who were Letterman partisans felt is that Letterman is kind of more authentic, and he makes fun of the artifice of show business. So it struck me that seemed weird to me that they were doing, and yet I did what I was told. So after the show was over, I waited after, and the usher came out, and sure enough, gave me this can of Spam. And in the back, it said, "David Letterman, I loves my Spam." And it was like the greatest moment of my life. And I went off to college, and I put it right above my computer, and I was in my dorm for 2 years, and I took it with me, and I showed it off to people at parties and stuff, and I went to New York, and I put it on my desk, and I told people the story, and they were impressed, and I told people it, and then I decided to write this book, and I told the story a lot, and people were like, "All right, we get it," and then finally, at the end of the process, David Letterman agrees to do an interview with me, and he said he was only going to talk to me for an hour, so of course I'm not going to ask him about this can of Spam in an hour, because I had many things to get to. So we sit down, and the interview goes fantastic, beyond what I could have imagined. He's willing to talk for as long as I want to talk. So in the fourth hour, I said to myself, I'm just going to go for it. What's the deal with Spam? Is this a thing that they do? Is this did he come up with this idea? Where is I loves my Spam? Why is it I loves? Why Spam? I have so many questions. So I say, Dan, I just have to ask you this one thing. This thing really meant a lot to me. When I went to see your show the second week of CBS, and the guy told me to get in. But right when I started to say this, I could see in his eyes that he like a sadness came over him, and he started shaking his head and looking down, and I clearly could tell that he did not autograph this can of Spam. And I've been telling the story for 20 years, a lie, and then there was this weird dynamic, because Letterman apologized profusely. I'm so yeah, and he apologized again and again, almost in a kind of operatic way about how horrible it was, you know, that here's this fan of his, and he doesn't, and it made me a little uncomfortable because on the one hand, you know, I didn't ruin my life. You know, I can take it. I can be, but it was sort of, to me, when I came back and listened to that, that kind of reflexive, over the top, self-critical streak struck me as something which was not only quintessential about him, but also funny. He made this apology of something so trivial really funny, and it turned into a key anecdote in the introduction of the book. And so in a weird way, you know, what he gave me there was way more valuable than an autograph.
So I think we only have time for one or two questions. I'm just wondering if you guys have to ask. The balcony? Yes.
Did you get any sense in talking to Dave or anyone around Dave that he will be doing anything other than showing up in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame?
If you would have asked me this a month ago, I would have thought, I would have said, and again, the short answer is I don't know. But I would have thought that he would have followed the Seinfeld model of definitely not coming back to TV, but doing something smaller on a streaming service, say, and involving conversation, because he likes control and he likes conversation. He's pretty good at it, and I think he misses being doing something in entertainment, but he doesn't want to go and do a show again. I no longer believe that, although it still could happen. Now, when I just see him going to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and I thought he was fantastic introducing Pearl Jam, really funny and heartfelt. And I see him popping up at these other kind of weird places. My friend of mine, Brett, pointed this out. I think another model could be Bill Murray, where instead of doing some other big project, he becomes this sort of weird folk hero who pops up with his beard in random, like he might walk in right here and everyone will stop paying attention to me and we'll all focus on him. And that will scratch this itch of performing and dealing with people without, you know, maybe he'll give out the best picture for Oscar one year or something. I mean, my sense is he's definitely not going the Johnny Carson route, which was a possibility of being completely reclusive. He's been doing interviews, he's been showing up at all these places, but whether or not he's definitely, I feel very confident that he's not going to come back and do a talk show. He shows no inclination to want to do some kind of sustained television thing, but there'll be something in between, I think, is what he'll do. I should say tomorrow is his birthday, and you know he's I think 70. Someone knows here at the time, but you know, I think he still has many good years of entertaining left if he wants, and you know he can do whatever he wants to do at this point.
One more question? Anybody? Yes, in the back.
Did you talk to him about the Oliver Reed or interview?
The Oliver Reed or Crispin Glover interviews. Did I talk to you? I did not. I definitely talked about the Crispin Glover interview to a lot of people, which is a fascinating one. This is the one where you know, Letterman was known early on for having Andy Kaufman on and do these incredible stunts that were often confrontational, and Crispin Glover clearly decided to do that without telling them though. And Crispin Glover came on, and he had this long hair, and he was acting crazy, and he basically tried to kick Letterman, but sort of pantomime it. And it was an interesting moment. This is in 1987, I believe. But Letterman did something which I don't think any talk show host would do today, which is that he just walked off stage. He didn't go to commercial. He just left. He left. Where I think if like this happened to Fallon or Colbert, they would. I mean, it's actually you can make something of it. You know, you can make. But it was a kind of very strange moment. And there was around that same time he had this sort of famous interview with Harvey Pekar, which was also a little tense. He had a couple of these. But you know, Crispin Glover came back on the show and did fine. But that was an interesting moment, I think, where I think Letterman, while there's this tension, and I talk about it in the book, between what Letterman is great at and what Letterman thinks he's great at, or what Letterman wants to do. And one of the things Letterman's great at is ad-libbing and being spontaneous and responding in the moment. He's incredible, and he's so quick. And yet, he hated surprises. And there was a period early in his career where his staff could engineer surprises from the show, and that would produce great comedy. But he generally didn't like it. So this kind of Crispin Glover thing, which could produce great TV, he wasn't interested.
Well, thank you so much, Jason. So there, after I guess right now, there's a book signing. So please join us in the lobby. And as you mentioned, there's a very good reception after this. And if you're sticking around, we suggest that you see the high masterpiece known as Beavis and Butthead to America at 9:15. Thank you so much again.
Thank you.